Well, hello there everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gun Tank. This is not the 2-year-long promised episode 3 on the Conq-I, but rather episode 4, as I have decided to rename my development series to Gun Tank, as that seems to be the name everybody attributes to my development videos anyways. So without further ado, let us begin discussing the development of the Stridsvagn 103, or S-Tank for short. And I apologize to any Swedes watching, as I will probably end up butchering the pronunciations, but I will try my best regardless. For those who are not aware, the S-Tank is a fully tracked, 3-man, main battle tank designed by Sweden during the 1950s. The most unique external feature of the S-Tank is its lack of a turret and a completely fixed 105mm Bofors L62 cannon. Fed from an internal auto-loading mechanism containing 50 rounds, it fires the same ammunition found on the Royal Ordnance L7 105mm L52 at a rate of about 20 rounds per minute. The gun itself is aimed by moving the entire vehicle. How they managed to do this we will get to later on in the episode, as I don't want to quite spill all the beans yet. It is also unique in the fact that it is entirely possible to drive, aim, and fight the vehicle with only one person, as both the commander and the driver/gunner have the same driving and gunnery controls at each of their stations, with the radio operator having his own set of driving controls facing the rear of the vehicle in the likely event that they will need to retreat. To understand why Sweden adopted such an unorthodox design, one must take a look at the situation Sweden found itself during and post-World War II. As most people who study the geopolitics surrounding World War II know, Sweden was officially neutral during the conflict, watching from the sidelines as they proceeded to help arm both sides like the good capitalists they were. While Sweden itself has not been involved in a war since their little kerfuffle with the Norwegians in 1814, that hasn't stopped them from being one of the most successful arms designers in recent centuries. Sweden was one of the few countries outside of the major powers to equip themselves with semi-automatic rifles in the form of the AGM-42. In addition, they also had a fairly powerful surface fleet of coastal defense battleships such as the Swedish class, and the Swedish Air Force, while quite small by comparison to the warring powers, operated quite a few modern aircraft. They also had a wildly successful export in the form of the superbly well-regarded 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannon, which was used and developed by virtually everybody who could get their hands on them. And I mean everybody. Especially the Allies, who took it one step further and straight up licensed production of the Bofors and proceeded to manufacture something on the order of 60,000 of them. As far as tank development was concerned, the Swedes were primarily equipped during the war with the Stridsvagn M42, which, while a more than adequate vehicle for the 1930s and the first couple of years of the 40s, was getting a little long on the tooth by the time World War II had come to a close. Weapons and thereby tank developments had advanced rather significantly during the slight disagreement across the Baltic, and the Swedes were paying close attention. After the war, the Swedes had looked at the use of heavy tanks by the warring powers and determined that a heavy tank could be utilized in the terrain of Sweden. This program became known as the Kranvagn, or KRV for short. Kranvagn is actually a cover name, as it literally translates to crane wagon or crane vehicle, and mock-ups of the completed vehicle bear a striking resemblance to the French AMX-50 program and the Soviet IS-3 in the turret and hull respectively. This is not by accident, as the Swedes themselves tested an AMX-50 rather extensively. They liked the idea of an oscillating turret, as it provides the unique benefit of keeping the gun constantly aligned with what were, at the time, otherwise somewhat finicky and complicated autoloading mechanisms, greatly improving their reliability. Now keep that info in the back of your heads as we continue. The Swedes wasted no time building the hull of the KRV for use in mobility trials to test its potential capabilities. However, the gun and the turret were never completed, as the designers were uncertain what gun they should actually use. Some sources point to the vehicle being equipped with a 155mm smoothbore cannon, while others point to a 120 or 100mm gun calibers. Regardless, the program ultimately went nowhere and was shelved due to costs and a new opportunity that had arisen. Mainly that the British had developed and adopted a new vehicle known as Centurion, and were looking to export it to whomever was interested. As it turns out, the Swedes were interested, and contracted for 80 of the vehicles in early 1953 under the designation Stridsvagn 81. While this was going on, a man by the name of Sven Berge had been working in the background at the Swedish Arms Administration. He was obsessed with reducing the silhouette of armored vehicles. A vehicle with a lower silhouette is naturally much more difficult to hit, easier to conceal, can have a bigger gun, and could be much more heavily protected for the same weight of a regular tank. Everything is a trade-off though. One of the issues with lowering the silhouette is crew space and leaving room for the gun to elevate and traverse. Berica wanted to reduce the amount of internal volume as much as possible while remaining comfortable for the crew. One way to do this is to remove crew members, in this case the loader, who was replaced by an auto-loading mechanism. However, you can recall that a free traversing gun can be exceptionally difficult to install a reliable autoloader onto. In addition to this, firing on the move was not considered practical for most tanks of the era. While stabilizers did obviously exist, they were often not sufficient to allow for accurate aimed fire at anything much greater than walking pace. Due to the lack of any practical solution for these two problems while remaining a low silhouette, the decision was made to dispense with the turret entirely and fix the gun directly to the hull. That way, the gun is in the same position for the autoloader to feed rounds every single time, which greatly simplifies and increases the potential for a reliable feeding of the gun. As I'm sure you've realized, this creates another problem. How do you aim the gun? This is where Berica was actually really innovative. He developed a fully automated hydraulic suspension system that would allow for fine laying of the gun on target. This made the fixed gun idea far more practical, as not being able to aim the gun is a significant problem, as you can imagine. As far as protection was concerned, the design was tested with 40mm and 50mm thick plates sloped at 79 degrees to the vertical, along with a new design of ribbed armor. It was found that by welding 40mm tall by 30mm wide bars to the exterior of the main 40mm plate, the main armor was much more resistant to hits and increased the ability of the plates to resist deformation. This also created a spaced armor effect, as whatever round hit these ribs has to pass through them and the heavily sloped upper glacis plate, often causing the rounds to simply ricochet up along the main plate, passing through the other ribs and greatly reducing the kinetic energy of the round. Another unique design feature of the vehicle was its power plant, or rather both of them. The S-Tank is equipped with both a diesel engine and a gas turbine, allowing it to become the first combat vehicle with a gas turbine engine. The Rolls-Royce diesel engine provided about 240 horsepower, with the Boeing gas turbine delivering a total of about 300 horsepower. On top of all this, the vehicle's design was meant to be simple to operate and maintain, which, considering that most of the Swedish Armed Forces are based on conscripts, was extremely important. These design principles were submitted under the designation Alternative S. The best part of this design, however, was that it was affordable. This was the early Cold War era, and Sweden was more than a little concerned about an invasion by the Soviet Union. Considering they had tried to invade Finland in the Winter War and had eventually brought almost all of Eastern Europe under its influence, these fears were not unfounded. And Sweden knew that they simply did not possess the numbers of effective combat vehicles to repel a Soviet armored attack. Under this context, Bofors was asked to build a prototype of the suspension and drivetrain, which passed its trials. By 1958, an order came down for the first two pre-production prototype vehicles known as Stridsvagn S1 and Stridsvagn S2. These vehicles were completed by 1961 and were followed by a pre-production batch of 10 vehicles, designated Zero Series vehicles, later referred to as Strv 103-0. Following these tests, the vehicle entered service as Stridsvagn 103, 103 referring to the third vehicle type with a 10cm gun in service. Full production began in 1965, with the first deliveries arriving in 1967. This first vehicle, which would later become designated Strv 103A, as we will see why here in a moment, included a few changes over the pre-production series. The MG and toolboxes were changed slightly, as well as the headlights and the headlight guards. Addition of the bar armor that we discussed earlier was placed over the engine compartment, or upper front plate depending on how you see it. No water fording equipment was provided for the vehicle, which is a pretty distinct feature. And the testing began in 1966 of an anti-heat fence screen. Now this fence screen was designed to detonate shape-charged warheads before they reached the main armor of the vehicle, thereby further protecting the vehicle from, say, anti-tank guided missiles or shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons. In addition, it was determined early on that the vehicle was slightly underpowered after the production modifications had added weight to the vehicle. While the vehicle could achieve a top speed of 50 km per hour forwards and 44 km per hour backwards in ideal conditions, the Boeing gas turbine's 300 horsepower was simply not enough, and after the 80th vehicle or so, a new Caterpillar 553 gas turbine was installed that boosted the horsepower up to 490. Combined with the diesel engine, this gave a total horsepower of 730. The vehicle was also equipped with the heat screens that had been tested on the previous 103A, cementing it as a common feature of the vehicle, however a military secret until the 1990s. This version of the vehicle was designated Strv 103B. The earlier models, to differentiate them, were designated as A, and eventually all of the vehicles were converted into at least B models. 15 years after adoption, it was decided to upgrade the S-Tank to what would become the Strv 103C. This was done to keep up with advancing gunnery technology and power plant advances. The vehicle received a new fire control system and laser rangefinder for improved first hit probability, along with all vehicles being equipped with a dozer blade rather than one per platoon, which were used to help dig fighting positions for the vehicles. Around 1987 or 88, depending on the source, the old Rolls-Royce 240 horsepower diesel engines were replaced with Detroit 290 horsepower diesel engines and extra fuel tanks. The final variant of the vehicle would be known as the 103D. This was a test program performed in the mid-90s that introduced an even more advanced fire control system, and most importantly, gunner and commander thermal optics as well as passive light enhancers for the driver's position. The suspension and engines received a tune-up, as well as some other minor unnamed modifications. And there was even a vehicle that was tested via remote control. However, all of these upgrades were considered too expensive and redundant considering the adoption of the Strv 122 in 1997. As far as its operational service was concerned, the vehicle was well liked for being rugged, reliable, and easy to use and maintain. Being tailor designed for the Swedish homeland meant that it was able to operate with very little difficulty on existing Swedish infrastructure. Its innovative design principles fit the Swedish military budget and doctrine perfectly, and while it may not have been the best vehicle in the world, having made some pretty heavy compromises in versatility in favor of its oddball design, it was affordable and effective for what the Swedes wanted it to do. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and please leave a like down below. If you enjoyed this type of content, please leave a comment as well, letting me know what I should cover next, as well as thanking my patrons for being so generous. For as little as $3 a month, you get special access to the #Council of Shills in my Discord, where only other patrons and Twitch subscribers can actually chat with me privately, and as well as early access to all my upcoming video content. So without further ado, thank you guys for listening. This has been Many Miles Away. Keep your tracks checked, keep your binoculars in place, keep around on the tube, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Are they gone? One last thing.
I'm back, you scrub lords.